We need a theme song. So could you please send me a theme song? 'Cause we don't really have a theme song. And we could really use a theme song. Send us a song. I welcome you wherever you may sit from my home that sits on Treaty 8 land, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree and Dene. This territory is home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. I thank the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. Tremendously grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. I make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory I reside on. Hi, everybody. It's me. First off, apologies. I did not broadcast last week. I was kind of disappointed at myself. But yeah, I just didn't do it. I was just kind of in a slump of, I had thrown my back out and so I couldn't really move and I had to miss work and I feel terribly guilty if I need to call in sick to work. But I couldn't get out of bed and, you would think that maybe I would have tried to brighten my spirits by writing because I don't have to move that much to do that. And I did not do that. I wallowed in self-pity. So sorry, I was not here. But now I'm here. One of my biggest fears actually about skipping anything that I do regularly is how hard it is for me to get back on track and convince myself to pick up the next time. It's exceptionally difficult. And so right now I'm going to, rather than dwell in my shame that I dropped the ball last week, I am going to revel in celebration that I picked it up this week. And I have a couple of lovely stories to share with you. So I talked 2 weeks ago about how we were going to do fairy tales because my daughter and I had found this podcast that we really liked that's telling these fairy tales, and the storyteller in them is just lovely. So we've been really enjoying those, and I started thinking in terms of fairy tales. So I've had a couple percolating in my mind. And then I'm trying to get this big paper done for the end of this schooling that I'm doing. And there's a metaphor that has just really persisted in my brain. And so I am turning that into a series of fairy tales. So today you get to hear part one. But guess when I started writing part one? I started writing part one last night at 3 a.m. So last night I woke up at 2 o'clock and I don't know why that I woke up. I don't know why I could not get back to sleep. I tend to just turn on a podcast and just sit and listen, and I'm usually asleep in 2 to 10 minutes. It is very rare if I put my podcast sleep alarm where it turns off after 10 minutes. It is very rare for me to still be awake when it turns off. But this time I was. And so I reset it again, this time for a half an hour. And I was still awake. And then I set it again, this time for whenever that episode ended. I'm like, maybe I'm just too interested in this episode. And that's why I can't fall asleep. And then that episode ended and I was like, no, that's not it. I don't know why I'm awake. I'm just going to get up and try and write my story for tomorrow because I haven't done it yet. Because we all know how much I love to procrastinate. So, I wrote like a couple of paragraphs, started to feel sleepy, thank goodness. So at like 4:30, I got back to sleep. And today I was actually pretty fine. Like, I didn't feel excessively tired or anything. I don't know what was going on. But anyway, I wrote just the first chunk of this fairy tale. And then when I came home today, I talked to my daughter and I said, I have to get ready for the thing tonight. So you get your after school chores done and then you can, do this or do that. Great. So, she just kind of came and sat with me while I started rereading what I had been working on. And I said, well, I'll read this to you. And why don't you just tell me? Because I couldn't even really remember where I had been going with it or whatever yet. But I said, why don't you just listen to it? Tell me if I should continue on with this one right now or if I should just start again. And she said, okay. So she listened to the first sentence, which I will read to you right now, is my friends, if you have ever sat about your house with upwards of 1,000 options of things to do, but not one of which meeting your standard for adventure, then you may well begin to understand how Harlow Vare was feeling on the day she called the dragon. And Matilda said, that's boring, start again. And then I said, well, no, I'm going to read through what I have first. So you don't have to listen. If it's boring to you, then just don't listen. Just go away. But if you want to give me, tell me if it's boring or if it's exciting, you have to actually listen to the whole thing. So then she did listen to the whole thing, which I will read in a moment. And then she said, hey, Mom, can I tell you what to write in the next couple of lines? And I said, sure. And so I started, and she just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then she had written quite a big chunk of story. And then I said, okay, I really have to work on my story. So you gotta, and she said, well, can you combine it with your story? And I said, well, I want this part to be your part. So I have the introduction and you've written all of this really great stuff. And I was just typing as she was telling the story. There was a couple of times where I made a suggestion, if I didn't think that the reader would know who was talking, or if I reading it back wouldn't remember who was talking, then I would say, oh, can you say this person said this? Or I would ask her who's talking. So then she would adjust what she was doing. So I wrote, made those suggestions, but she did legitimately from after where my intro stopped, she did compose the rest. I just typed it. Now, then we video, because she's in bed already, so we videotaped her telling the story. Now, she didn't want to read all of my wordy stuff at the beginning, so I'll read that. My first, couple of paragraphs, and then we'll switch to her. She does, just because she changed one word in my last paragraph. So her paragraph starts with something I wrote. So there's a couple times where I'm trying to tell her what the words are. I think that only happened once with a word that she had composed, but just couldn't remember what word it was when she went to go read it. Her verbal vocabulary exceeds her what she can read by quite a long shot. She just has a strong vocabulary. But some of there's a few of the words in just the little couple of sentences that I had written that she's just not sure about the words. Also, she had a hard time with the name of the protagonist, which is Harlow. So a couple of times I remind her how to say Harlow, and at the very end, I believe she calls her Carlos. That's what it sounds like to me. But anyway, it's just fun. So first, what do we want to do first? Oh, she gave a lovely goodbye at the end of hers to you guys. So I will start with my own. So this is part one of this fairy tale metaphor that I've had in my mind. Also, I don't know if you guys can hear, but Across the street from my house, there's some bagpipes playing. If you can hear that and it's distracting to you, I apologize. But it kind of is fitting with my, not necessarily the bagpipes per se or the songs that they're playing, but distracting music is kind of on theme for my for my fairy tale. So um, here is Calling the Dragon, Part 1. My friends, if you have ever sat about your house with upwards of 1,000 options of things to do, but not one of which meeting your standard for adventure, then you may well begin to understand how Harlow Vare was feeling on the day she called the dragon. Harlow lived in Teetole, a village on the edge of the kingdom of Akan Kuaza, where the west wind whistles through the hills just so. It creates a lovely tune that blows in and out of the village several times a day. The song is named Dio Fischio, and travelers come from far and wide for a chance to hear it with their own ears. Upon hearing it, some weep, and the rest merely marvel at the magic of the music. But for Harlow, who was born in Teetole and had listened to the Dio Fischio every day of her life, she found the tune dull and the attention it received exasperating. Let me ask you, my friends, have you ever thought in your head, or let me ask you, my friends, have you ever had a thought in your head that you couldn't quite reach? When your brain momentarily forgets to translate an idea into a word so it can become something tangible, and you struggle for a time and your sentence grinds to a halt, and you have the feeling of being locked out of a life changing, brilliant thought, and that word you can't think of is the key to the lock, but try as you might, it will simply not come to you. Harlow had that feeling often. She blamed the Dio Fischio. She thought perhaps if she could just find a quiet place outside in the air that matched the fierce quiet that she could feel inside of herself, she might be able to unlock her mind and know what it was she was missing. It wasn't that Harlow was sad. She wasn't sad. She wasn't scared or angry or confused either. She just wasn't quite as happy as she thought she could be. If only she knew how. And that, my friends, is why on the eve of her 16th birthday, Harlow slipped outside the wall of the village and embarked on a trek over the hills to what she hoped would be a silent beyond. Harlow journeyed for many thousands of steps. Every time she thought she had, perhaps, traveled far enough, or that she was too tired to continue on, she would stop and stand in the stillness. And sometimes, after a brief moment, and other times after a long rest, a nap, a meal, and a cask of water, just when Harlow let herself hope that she had found the quiet she craved, the breeze would rub her tired shoulders and the Dio Fischio would find her ear. Harlow withstood this consistent disappointment for as long as she could, which was far longer than you might have predicted, my friends. But suddenly she could bear it no more. She collapsed to the ground as her feet refused to take even one more step. She threw her fists at the ground and shrieked with a wild futility until her breath ran out. Then a pile of Harlow sobbed softly, alone in the middle of the world. Before long, Harlow started to make out a new sound, the light crunching of footsteps approaching. She looked up. To her surprise, when she lifted her head, a tall cedar tree towered above. Harlow did not believe that the tree had been there when she had arrived at this spot, but in case she was mistaken, she peered all around to see if she could find another source of the footstep sounds. She saw none. She did notice that the ground beyond the cedar tree was disturbed, as though it had been recently tread upon. "Have you just arrived?" Harlow whispered after a pause. And then, after a longer pause, the cedar rumbled back. "Indeed, I have." Harlow had a lot of questions. But as she stood gaping at the cedar, she failed to sputter out a single one. "Relax," encouraged the cedar. "Forget about what you thought you knew about me. It is silly to imagine you would know me at all. We haven't even properly met yet." Harlow didn't relax. She didn't move. She just waited. Kind of. To say that she waited implies that she was expecting something to happen. Expecting anything was far beyond what Harlow was capable of just then. It wasn't just that she didn't know what might happen. She actively wanted nothing to happen. She was frozen and wished with every inch of her skin that time had frozen right along with her. But of course it hadn't. Soon the towering cedar rumbled again. "I am Cedar, from the forest of Godan, and I patrol the hills. I noticed you have traveled far, far from your home, far from your village, far even from where most of your stature ever roam. Only two creatures like you have ever been spotted this far out. Those who flee and those who seek. Which creature are you?" Harlow looked back at Cedar. Carefully, she closed her mouth to swallow, as her gaping had left it quite dry. She opened it again to admit to this tall, majestic patrolman that she did not know which she was, nor why she was here, but before she could stop it, her voice slipped out of her mouth. "I am seeking," she said. And then, "I am Harlow, one who seeks." The words came through her easily, as though she had rehearsed them before. "And what do you seek, child?" Cedar asked. "I seek a secret," Harlow replied. "A secret?" "It's something that I know well, and yet its name I cannot quite remember, and its quality I cannot quite describe." "Then how shall you find it?" "Just when I get near to uncovering it in my memory, the breeze blows through the hills and the D'Officio distracts me. I need to journey far enough that the D'Officio will not follow me." "Ah," Cedar sighed. "Have you considered calling a dragon?" A dragon! Harlow exclaimed. Of course! A dragon might fly me away to a stretch of silence long enough that I can catch my secret in it. Cedar bowed slightly in a nod that soon cracked open into a wide smile as Harlow asked, Might you help me call one? Call a dragon? And that's the end of part one. So yeah, if any of you have any feedback for me on that part one of the story, and what kind of parts about it you liked and what kind of parts of it you're like, yeah, this got a little bit wordy or confusing. Wordy and confusing is kind of like my jam. Uh, so please feel free to let me know as I continue to work on the subsequent two parts. So yeah, so that's the one that I wrote. Now, the beginning part of that was what I wrote at 3 o'clock in the morning ish. When I went back and like started writing, sometimes I would go up and edit some things or add something in that I thought needed to be there. And so it wasn't exactly the one that I had read to Tilly. Pretty close, but not exactly. So now I am going to read to you the first part of what I've read to the first section that I had read to Tilly. And then I'll just kind of repeat. Well, no, I'll end off right where she's going to begin. And then I will play her video and you can watch her begin. I did have to separate this just because of the program that I'm working with into two different videos. So I'll try and be on it as quickly as I can, but if there's a break in the video, that's why. I'm sure you get it. And yeah, so without further ado, here is further ado while I tell the beginning part of Little Miss Tilly's story. If you have ever sat about your house with upwards of 1,000 options of things to do, not one. I'm just going to start that again. I started thinking something as I was reading, and that's not helpful. Okay. If you have ever sat about your house with upwards of 1,000 options of things to do, but not one of which meeting your standard for adventure, then you may well begin to understand how Harlow Vare was feeling on the day she called the dragon. Harlow lived in Teetole, a village on the edge of the kingdom of Abstanatane, where the west wind whistled through the hills just so to create a lovely tune that blew in and out of the village several times a day. The song was named De Officio, and travelers came from far and wide for the chance to hear it with their own ears, and each would marvel at the beauty and magic of it all. But for Harlow, who was born in Teetole and had listened to the De Officio every day of her life, the tune was dull, and the attention it received was exasperating. Have you, my friends, ever had a thought in your head that you couldn't quite reach? When your brain momentarily forgets to translate an idea into a word so that it can become something tangible, and you struggle for a time thinking, why can't I think of the word? And your sentence grinds to a halt, and you have the feeling of being locked out of a life changingly brilliant thought, but the word you can't think of is the key, and try as you might, it simply will not come to you. Harlow had that feeling often. She blamed the De Officio. She thought perhaps if she could just find a quiet place outside in the air that matched the fierce quiet that she could feel inside of herself, she might discover the missing something that she needed to be happy. Uh, she might discover the missing something that she needed to be happy that so far she could never quite reach.
And that, my friends, is why on the eve of her 9th birthday, Harlow slipped outside the wall of the village and embarked on a track over the hills to what she hoped would be a silent beyond. Okay, after standing there for quite some time, the blowing stopped. She after 9 years, after 9 years, she finally found her special something. Missing something. But then she heard a rustling. Strange, she thought. There is no grass or bushes or trees, and yet she could hear a rustling. She tried to go further, but the wind wouldn't let her. She tried and tried to get through the barricade, but she just couldn't do it. She felt a strong push. It blew her back. She closed her eyes for a minute or an hour or a second. She didn't know. Suddenly, she found that her alarm was going off, and the next thing she knew, she was back in bed. She wondered aloud, was I dreaming the whole thing? But then she looked down and saw herself wearing the exact clothes that she had put on that very night, the ones that she used to go out. Then she looked way down at her feet and said, these are my shoes that I wore last night. Peculiar. She heard her mom calling, get dressed. So she took off her dirty clothes and she went to school. After she got dressed, of course. And that very night, she went out through the village gates, through the mountains and hills, until she was finally past the boundary of her village. This is not part of the story, but so the boundary goes 20 miles away from the village, then the gates. Okay. So where was I? Oh yes, she heard that silent something again, and then she saw her feet marking in the dirt from last night. She stood just there. Yet again, she felt a strong blow, but this time it did not push her back. The wind grew stronger and stronger. She insisted, holding on as hard as she could. Suddenly it stopped. She heard a little voice, and she could tell that the voice wasn't coming from inside her head, because she plugged her ears, she heard nothing. It was a tiny crack, just like the wind. The voice said, "Please, come closer." Harlow did. The voice said, "I am a spirit of life. Sometimes my little brother sneaks away into your village. Me and my brother have been trapped as winged spirits for over 100 years. Help us return to children again." Harlow said, "What do I need to turn you back?" "5 things," the voice replied. What are they?" said Harlow. "They are the hardest things to get, but they aren't in your village." "What are they?" said Harlow. "Water with no fish from a wishing well, a tear of happiness, a dream, a tuft of cloud from the sky, and the last one is hard, true blue water. This one is not in your village." Harlow asked, "Where can I find it?" "Past the reaches of the last tree." "Past the reaches of the last tree," the voice replied. "Where the wind does not blow and the birds do not sing. Where there is only 3 sounds. The first, grass rustling. The second is the sound of stepping from you. Right. And the last is the sound of running water." Harlow went home. She went back to bed, went to school the next morning. That very night, again, she set off. It took 2 hours to get there, and she had a sigh of relief when she remembered that there were 5 hours of sleep that night before her mom woke her up. So she would get 1 hour of sleep at least. Finally, she reached the water, the true blue water. Then she ran home as fast as she could, but stopped as soon as she remembered the pail of true blue water in her hands. She turned around and saw her footprints in the dirt from the night before. She stood right there and waited and waited and waited and waited. she waited until the sun rose up so she could just see it. Then she heard the wind. Here's the fifth thing, the voice whispered. Good. Bring it back home and then put all the other things inside. Harlow ran back home. She took off her clothes and put on her pajamas. She had been wearing she acted as if she had been sleeping because as soon as she had finished putting on her pajamas, she heard her mother finishing up her shower. She rushed into her unicorn printed sheeted bed and shut her eyes tight. She held on to the covers as if her life depended on it. Where am I? She heard her mom thump, thump, thump across the floor. Her mom opened Harlow's bedroom door and said, Harlow, get dressed. And also, why is there a pail of true blue water? Oh, said Harlow, it's just an experiment from my class. Which class? Asked her mom. Harlow replied, Science class, I guess. Let's see your grade on it, Mom asked. No! Why not, Harlow? Asked her mom. Because, this class wasn't graded. Yeah. Oh, that's new, said her mom. New science, new things, right, Ma? Right, Harlow, said Mom. And also new school, new times. So you're going to be late for school. Oh, jeez, said Carlos. You're right, Mom. I had better get dressed. And that's the end of our story today. Goodbye. See you next Thursday.
And that's the end of our stories today. Goodbye. See you next Thursday. Next Thursday, I'm hoping that I can gather the crew together to do some improv. But that will be pending. So if you would like to participate in improv, just let me know at virtualvarietynight at gmail.com. And also, if you're interested in any of our nights, or if you would like to share your creativity on a Thursday night, I'd be happy to incorporate you in what we've got going on. By what we've got going on, I mostly mean what I've got going on, but I'm hoping that will build again soon. So yeah, I'm hoping for improv next week, but that I find very, very difficult to do on my own. So if it's just me again next week, I might do something else. Maybe I'll I'll tell you guys part 2 of Calling the Dragon. And see how Harlow Vare is doing. that's what I got for you today. Thank you very much for being patient with me when I uh, needed to take last week off. But I'm back. I'm ready for next week. Well, no, I'm not ready. I'm going to be ready for next week at the last minute, like I always am. But I'm excited to see you again next week. Cheers. And have a very, very lovely long weekend.
We need a theme song, so could you please send me a theme song? 'Cause we don't really have a theme song, and we could really use a theme song. Send us a song.